And we're live. Welcome to Set Impact, where we discuss how emerging technology is changing sectors, society, and the world at large. For a brief period of time, for around about 6 weeks, I'll be speaking to some founders solving some of the most hardest and most interesting problems over LinkedIn Live. Today, we have Peter, the CEO of Odin Vision. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you jumping on this morning. I mean, okay, could you tell us about could you tell us what you're currently up to and highlight the mission of Odin Vision?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you're suspected of having a bowel cancer, a doctor will perform an endoscopy procedure where they're using a camera, very much like the one in your smartphone, to look for abnormal pieces of tissue called polyps. And those polyps can then change and become cancer. They're the early signs of cancer. The problem is they're really hard to see. They're very difficult to spot. And doctors miss about 25% of those polyps. So at Odin, we've developed some technology that can help doctors see those polyps earlier. And once they've located them during that colonoscopy procedure, we can then support them to characterize those polyps as well.
I mean, what makes them really difficult to see?
Yeah. So there's I'm a computer scientist by background. I don't have a medical background. So there are some videos of these polyps that we see, and even I can see them. They sort of look like big mushrooms. They're really in the middle of the image, and they're sort of very large. And those are sort of the easy ones to see, and doctors don't need help spotting those ones. Then there's diminutive polyps. These are really small ones. And they can be quite tricky to spot because they are physically quite small, and so they appear to be small in the image, and they're sort of like dots on the surface of the mucosa. And then the really difficult ones are flat polyps or sessile serrated polyps. And when the doctors show me images of them, I can't see anything in the image. It just looks like totally normal tissues to me. But funnily enough, all of the doctors see them. And when we get the machine learning that's trained to detect it, the machine learning sees it as well. So it's certainly better than I am, but it's really helpful at spotting those very difficult to find polyps. Yeah.
I mean, could you tell, before we go into your technology, your company, and what you guys have achieved so far? I mean, it'd be really interesting to go through your personal story and what led you to start a company like this.
Sure. I studied computer science back in the day. I then went off and decided. So I thought, well, I'm going to go and make my career in IT. So I went off and joined the only .com at the time that was making any money, and that was a company called Tesco.com. And I remember a consultant coming in, giving us a review of all of our competitors out there. And he talked for about 2 minutes about this little company called Amazon that wasn't going to be around for too long. But obviously they've done quite well. Amazon, Tesco is obviously going strong still, especially at the moment. But I realized that, using IT to deliver products or deliver shopping wasn't really something I could be passionate about. And so I went back to university and I did a PhD in laparoscopic and endoscopic image processing using computer vision to process these images. And we were using that to reconstruct the liver, to navigate and create image guidance for different types of procedures, and using machine learning to power a lot of those applications. And I stayed at Imperial and did a postdoc there, but quickly realized that if you want to see technology transition into healthcare, you have to do that in a company. And so I joined Siemens Healthcare for about a decade in Germany, the US, and then the UK, and spent that time building a number of different applications, generally powered by artificial intelligence or machine learning, around everything from cardiac to laparoscopic imaging.
That's amazing.
Then I I suppose not that long ago, one of my colleagues from my time at my PhD at Imperial, that was Professor Dan Stoyanov. He went off and became a professor at UCL, and he was looking to spin this technology out of UCL. He felt it was mature enough. They had the backing from UCL Business, and so Odin Vision was set up, and I came on board to run it as CEO.
Oh, that's amazing. And in terms of the colonoscopy, I mean, what types of cancers and illnesses are well, I mean, what types of cancers are you guys trying to identify, you know, through a colonoscopy?
Yeah, so our technology can be applied to all types of gastric diseases. So at the moment, our initial target application is in colorectal cancers. And actually, we want to spot them before they become cancer. We want to spot them at a pre-cancerous or very early stage. So we're generally looking for those pre-cancerous signs of diseases or early stage polyps or adenomas in the bowel. But our technology is also applicable to the upper GI system. So that would include the esophagus, so the throat, the esophagus, looking for cancer there as well. And we've got a product out now that's doing the lower GI stuff, so the colonoscopy, and we've got a prototype version of the upper GI system that we'll be start trialing towards the end of this year.
That's incredible. So like your first use case would be, you know, colorectal cancer, and then you'll be able to, you know, see other use cases, might be IBS or a whole host of other issues. I mean, you know, the colonoscopy, you said the camera's similar to the one on your phone. Is it good enough to be able to see the gut lining, if you get what I mean? Because, I mean, you'll be able to see the polyps. I mean, I had a look at your website, but I mean, is it nuanced enough to be able to understand and evaluate the lining of the gut and the intensity?
Yes, so the cameras that are used, they differ by manufacturer, but they tend to have more than one light modality mode. So the basic light modality mode is a white light, which is the same as what you have in your mobile phone, and then they tend to have an additional light modality that might be something like narrowband imaging, where it gives you a slightly different spectrum, and so you can see the light penetrates the tissue more, and you see a slightly different image. So you may see more vessels, you see slightly below the surface of the tissue. And so those are the light modality modes that we actually use to do our AI assisted characterization of the tissue.
That's amazing. And I mean, in terms of the colonoscopy itself, I mean, what are some of the clinical challenges with it right now? And I mean, how does your technology assist in that process? And after that, I mean, could you kind of highlight some of the reactions that you've had from clinicians and doctors?
Yeah. So the performing a colonoscopy is incredibly challenging. I often liken it to a fighter pilot. They have to be controlling a sophisticated bit of equipment. They're moving it around, but at the same time, the person controlling it has to be processing that visual information very quickly, and they don't get much time to spot diseases. So you know, they're moving this scope around. The motion can be quite rapid sometimes, and so there's a chance that you will miss diseases very quickly. So first off, actually performing a colonoscopy is a very challenging task in itself, and doctors are under tremendous time pressure to get their lists done as well. So what our technology does is, the first thing a doctor has to do is they get the endoscope to the top of the bowel, which is called the cecum. And once they're at the top of the bowel, they start to with the withdrawal phase, where they actually start looking for disease. Well, the first thing our technology does is, once the doctors said, okay, I think I'm at the top of the bowel, they take a photograph of it, and we confirm that they've actually made it to the top of the bowel. There's an enormous number of cases where the doctors don't actually make it to the top of the bowel in the first place because it's so challenging to get there. So knowing that they've made it to the top, to the cecum, is really important. And around 20% of interval cancers or 20% of missed cancers are actually found in that cecal area as well. So that's around colonoscopy quality, making sure that the colonoscopy has been completed. Once they've reached the top of the bowel, they start that withdrawal phase. And in that phase, they are looking for those signs of diseases. So they are moving the scope back and they are moving it around to get a really good view of all of the tissue. But as I said, it can be very difficult to see these polyps. They can be flat and they can be very small. The big ones are kind of easy to see, and our system doesn't really help with that situation. It's those ones that doctors are likely to miss, those 25% of ones that doctors are likely to miss. As they're performing the colonoscopy, when our system, which processes everything in real time, when it sees one of those polyps, it will draw a box around it and it will set off an audio alarm, and then the doctor can then take a closer look at that tissue area, and the doctor then is responsible for making a decision themselves whether that piece of tissue is indeed a polyp or not. Once they've decided it's a polyp and they want to investigate it a bit more, perhaps they want to make a characterization or optical diagnosis, they can then use our system. So they center the polyp in the image, they press a button on our system, and we can tell them if that polyp has the visual characteristics of an adenoma, which is a high-risk one, or a non-adenoma, like a hyperplastic, which is a lower-risk polyp. The polyp can then be resected, but if the doctor is confident in their optical diagnosis, then they wouldn't necessarily need to send that to histopathology afterwards. So that's how we're supporting the doctors through the clinical workflow. The final piece that we do is that we do what we call live visible mucosa scoring. So the doctor can only see abnormal tissue if they can see the tissue in the first place. And in colonoscopy, the bowel can be dirty sometimes. And so we provide a live scoring of how much of the mucosa is actually visible, how much of the tissue is actually visible to the doctor, to help them understand have they really seen everything that they should be looking at.
That's really interesting. And could you highlight what you've built so far and how, could you kind of highlight what you've built so far and where you guys are at from a product standpoint?
Yes, so this technology has been developed over the past 3 or 4 years at University College London at the Weiss Institute. When it came to a point where it looked like it was becoming mature, that was the point when Odin was set up to commercialize the technology in order to bring it to patients. So it's been a long time in the making. Lots of technical research and lots of clinical data collection has gone on to get to that stage. In June this year, we received our CE mark. So we now have a regulatory approved product. It's been used in the UK and it's been used in Germany. And this year we will start 4 clinical studies in 19 hospitals to look at various different aspects of it, from the reporting capabilities through to the detection and the diagnostic capabilities as well.
That's amazing. In terms of your journey right now, up until now, obviously we've been hit by the pandemic. How has that affected you guys, and how did you have to adjust? How did you guys have to adjust? Because I can imagine, we spoke about it prior to going live. It makes things a little bit difficult, being able to label your data, etc. How did you guys have to adjust, and what did you have to do to kind of adapt to the pandemic?
The first thing we had to do was our offices shut, so we had to make sure all of our staff were able to work. And we use very powerful machines to do our machine learning training. So the first thing we had to do was, get everyone set up at home, and then move all of our machine learning to the cloud as well. So that was relatively straightforward for us. And it turns out, when you're working with a largely technical team, they are quite capable of working from home. We've got all the tools these days to be able to support that as well. And actually, in many ways, the team came together and was really supportive of each other. And I think actually some of the team members were even speaking more to each other than they were before, sitting next to each other in the office. So they're moving to remote working was step one. Following that, as the offices shut, what we saw was our clinical collaborators, people who had dedicating their lives to research and working with us to drive that research forward. They were taken out of those research roles and redeployed to frontline roles in the NHS. So over the course of about a week, we lost all of our research collaborators on all of our projects. So what that essentially meant was there was we lost that ability to work with them to help us label data. We lost the ability to work with them to answer questions, help us around the design of the usability of the product. Actually, quite quickly, it became clear that they wanted to keep in contact and they wanted to keep the projects going. So these guys were working 6 days a week, and on their day off, they were doing research because they're so passionate about doing that, which is a really phenomenal thing. And so whilst we had that dip and colonoscopy stopped and endoscopy procedures stopped at the beginning, because then they were everything except for non-urgent cases had stopped. We saw a total slowdown in data collection, for example. And that went on for a couple of months or so. What that allowed us to do was become very focused on getting the technology developed. So we poured all of our effort and time into making sure the technology was as good as it was. And slowly we started to see people returning from frontline and back into research and then back into endoscopy. And endoscopy isn't back at full flow yet, but it's starting to get there, and there's roadmaps towards getting it back on track as well. So the adapting to the pandemic had its challenges, but I think we were quite lucky compared to some of the other people that were out there. One of the other challenges we had was around the regulatory side of things. So we had set ourselves up with a quality management system to release our products that was all designed and developed around being able to test in the endoscopy room before we release products. Test in our mock endoscopy room, in our lab, in our office building, and obviously that wasn't possible. We couldn't get access to it, so we had to re-engineer some of the quality management processes in order to allow us to release our product during a pandemic.
And you may have to guard yourself on my next question, and tell me if you don't want to answer it. It's absolutely fine. It sounds quite bold, but how does your company make money? So you obviously don't have to tell the audience about the figures, but internally, do you guys have stats on how much you save the NHS if you catch something early and you prevent the onset of cancer? Because I'm sure the NHS having to deal with colorectal cancer, is a massive cost burden to the NHS, obviously, so. Do you guys have, internally, obviously, do you guys have stats on the type of the amount of money you think you can save the NHS? And also, how do you make money?
Yes, I won't go into details, but essentially, a late stage cancer detection or a late stage cancer treatment can be anywhere from £10,000 to £30,000 per year. So the cost associated with surgery and the costs associated with chemotherapy are very high. There is an additional element here that often gets forgotten, because we often talk about early detection saves lives.
Yeah.
But if you get a later stage bowel cancer, you may have surgery, you may have chemotherapy, and go back to living. It is not necessarily fatal. Survival rate is 100%. Is not zero. So, having had your surgery and your chemotherapy, people often say, well, you just go back to normal life. But actually, there is a massive impact on the quality of a patient's life.
Yeah.
They've had surgery to remove a piece of their bowel. It has a devastating impact on the quality of their life, both physically, mentally, and financially. It's like you would have a bag attached, so you would no longer have proper digestive function in the way that we think of it. And so whilst we think about those numbers that are very important for the NHS as well, around saving costs for reducing the amount of surgery and chemotherapy that's given, there's also a very centered part to our work as well, which is around that quality of life. If we can find cancer early, if we can find those polyps early, it costs a few £100 to remove them, and the patients return to work the next day. In fact, they get up and they walk out of the room. There's no very little impact to them. They might not have even felt the removal of it at all. So getting it early is so phenomenally better than getting it late. It's better in terms of costs. It's better in terms of patient impact as well. So we have some government grants. We've got NHS grants. We've had Innovate UK grants, and those are the two elements that they get excited about. The cost saving potential is very clear and obvious, but that patient impact element is really key as well. And we work with patient groups. We work with Bowel and research, Bowel and Cancer Research Charity, and we regularly hold patient focus groups to get feedback from the patients around how they perceive the technology, what they think is important, and how they feel it would impact their lives.
Yeah, that's incredible. Ideally, in an ideal world, 24 months from now, assuming you've got the resources and the talent that you need, and assuming we don't go into a large or substantial second wave, what do you hope to kind of achieve as a company, and also from a product standpoint in terms of the service that you can provide patients as well? What do you hope to achieve in the next, say, 24 months from an optimistic standpoint?
Our goals are around getting our technology out there and getting it used on patients and demonstrating patient impact and patient benefit. There's over 60 million colonoscopy procedures performed each year, and that's an awful lot of polyps that are being missed each year. So our primary goal is to get the technology out there and get doctors used to it, get doctors using it on a regular basis, and start to understand or start to drive that adoption across a healthcare system. And we've been working with people like the ASN in order to map out how we bring our technology across the NHS. And obviously, we're working with people in other parts of Europe to bring our technology there as well. One of the obviously big things that most medtech companies in the UK are looking to do is have an eye on the US as well. So we will, in 24 months' time, we will be in the US. We're going through the FDA process at the moment, so we'll look to have our technology in the US again being used. Now, around products, we've got our product roadmap, as we've already talked about. The lower GI technologies there, the upper GI is coming. But actually, as we start off with doing those two elements, which are around the detection of the disease and the characterization of the diagnosis, we then start to get into the really challenging technical areas around quality and around therapy. So measuring how well a colonoscopy or endoscopy procedure has been performed, and then understanding how effective has that therapy actually been delivered. So there's when a doctor finds a polyp, they'll put a lasso around it, and then they will remove it, or they will take a snare and they'll clip it out. But they may have missed some of that polyp. So artificial intelligence also has the ability to look at how effective that therapy has been at addressing the disease, addressing the task that the doctor was trying to perform. And then finally, we are part of a European consortium with 4 universities and hospitals funded through the Horizon 2020 scheme. And the goal there of that technology is actually to create a map of the entire bowel. And this is phenomenally challenging because the bowel is so flexible, it's non-rigid. But once we get to a point where we can say, we've got a map of the bowel, we can tell you how much of that bowel has been seen, how much has been missed. We can tell you how clean it was, how dirty it was, show you a map of exactly where all of the findings were. And then we start to get into really interesting areas, which is the longitudinal side of things. So when that patient comes back for their 1 year, 3 year, 5 year follow-up, you can start to look at comparing how the diseases have progressed, or was there a polyp in an area that hadn't been inspected in a previous colonoscopy as well. So this is really an area where the number of applications is just exploding. And one of our biggest challenges at the moment is keeping a narrow focus on things, because every time we talk to a doctor, they get excited about a new application in a new area and a new solution that we can bring. And at Odin, we've built our technology to be super flexible, such that as those new applications come in, we can build products very fast around that core machine learning technology. We can handle the big data. We can handle large annotations very, very quickly. And we can take it through a purpose-built regulatory process that we've developed that allows us to release our products very quickly under the FDA and under CE as well. So I think in 2 years' time, the world of endoscopy is going to look very different. We're on a precipice. We're on a threshold, a watershed moment. There's going to be endoscopy before AI and endoscopy after AI, and I think we're just at the moment where we're starting to see that change happen.
That's amazing. In terms of you, how long have you been on this journey for?
So I joined Odin in April last year, but I started doing my first processing of medical images, of endoscopy images, back in the early 2000s. It was obviously a very different world back then. We thought a big data set was sort of 10 videos of procedures, 10 patients. Now, obviously, we're in the tens of thousands, and we really do these things at industrial scale. And the really great thing is that, a lot of the ideas that were around then, around using computer vision to drive computer-aided systems, a lot of those original ideas have been around for 20 plus years. But it's only really with that change driven by deep learning that's allowed these to reach a clinically usable level, and allowed us to bring those technology into clinics to the point where doctors don't just go, yeah, it's okay, I think I could use it. They go, wow, that's great. That's really something I could use.
That's incredible. And what was the most what have been the most hard-hitting lessons since you started Odin Vision? You're now the CEO of the company. I mean, what has been have there been any humbling, or have there been any hard-hitting lessons since you begun your journey at Odin Vision?
I think one of the things we did very early was engage with a patient group.
Hmm.
And that was led by Leslie Booth from the Bowel and Cancer Research Charity. And we often sit around and we talk about this technology and how exciting it is. And you know, we've got some of the best research scientists working on developing these deep learning methods. And we get caught up in all the conference papers and the latest and greatest technique. Going and sitting with a group of patients for a couple of hours and talking to them and understanding the impact a disease has on someone's life is extremely humbling, and it really makes you refocus and reevaluate what are the important things about this technology. And it helps you cut down a little bit sometimes. So it's not about the fancy bells and whistles. It's about getting something that really has a patient impact and can change people's lives. But it also helped us see our technology very differently as well. So one of the things we weren't aware of at the time was in the UK, some patients are awake during their procedures, and they will be looking at the screen. And our system is putting boxes on the screen. It's putting up information about what's going on to communicate with the doctor. And so that helped us understand that we need to design a user interface that's not only acceptable to the end user, to the doctor, but is also acceptable to a patient as well. And so we go through processes of showing those user interfaces to those patients, showing the alert, the sounds, the alerts to the patients as well, to get their feedback, to get an understanding of how acceptable our technology is to them. So I would think if I was to say there's one thing that has had a massive impact on us, it's that patient engagement. I would really encourage anyone thinking about getting into developing medtech devices. Patient engagement right from the beginning is a really important thing.
That's incredible. And as we close to the end of the interview, is there anything that you want to kind of shout out before we end the interview? I mean, are you guys fundraising? Are you hiring? Are you guys doing a clinical trial? Do you have a new product release?
So we are hiring. So please go to our website, odin-vision.com, if you're interested in joining our team. We're not fundraising at the moment. We've got clinical trials starting at the end of the year, and I would can't say anything else other than that. But I would say keep an eye on London Tech Week. There's going to be some interesting announcements there today.
Amazing. Okay, we'll end the stream right now. But if you could stay on the stream for a bit, would that be okay?